I think it's about time that we actually started having conversations around trust. That the trust is even more fundamental than culture, right?
Yes.
Without trust, there is nothing else you can build. To get trust, you have to give trust. It's
Yeah.
a two-way street.
Hi, Jeby, and welcome to this conversation.
Good morning, Sai. Glad to be here.
Jeby, I was really wanting to talk to you today about trust and teams because, highly functioning teams that are really effective usually have this as a strong underlying theme, trust. And that's
Yeah,
really how we produce all the results that we produce as leaders. So,
correct.
um, I was just curious about in your, super wide experience of leading all kinds of teams, what have you seen, Jeby, as the typical dysfunctions, in teams?
No, I think the way you pose the question is so Sai, a lot of the answer is in there. I mean, trust is so fundamental to everything that we do, right? Not just in teams. I mean, society will cease to function if there is no trust, right?
Right.
The reason why we go to a doctor is because we trust the doctor to have the expertise, right? The reason why you trust the medicines that you buy from the pharmacy, hoping that it doesn't contain chalk powder, right? It's actually the medicine. So trust is so fundamental. And it is amazing that we don't think deliberately about trust. We just take it for granted, right? And I think it's about time that we actually started having conversations around trust, right? So when you look at in a team structure, right, what is the first symptom that you see that the team is being dysfunctional, right? And it's usually the lack of results,
Mm.
right? When you see that results aren't happening, we usually go to the external markets and say, is there a market problem? Is there a product problem? And at the end of all of that is when we come and say, okay, is there a problem inside of the team itself, right? And I would actually reverse that process and say, when something isn't working, can we look inside and say, is there a culture problem or is there a trust problem? So to me, the trust is even more fundamental than culture, right?
Yes.
Without trust, there is nothing else you can build, right? So I would look at the trust within the team. So what are the symptoms that you see? Lack of results, attrition is high, significant underperformance. You're not able to recruit talent. All of these things happen, right? And there are the usual things that happen within teams on the trust. But one thing I think we overlook is the role of leadership, right? In lack of trust, right? And the way it manifests itself and the way I've seen it manifest itself is micromanagement,
Right.
right? And micromanagement is, it happens in an environment where there is no trust. I mean, asked you to do something, I don't trust you, so I'm checking in with you every 5 minutes,
Right.
right? So it starts from the leadership level when the leader decides to trust the team. So see, one fundamental thing, the way I understand trust is, to get trust, you have to give trust. It's
Yeah.
a two-way street,
Yeah.
right? So if you're not willing to give trust, then you're not going to get anybody to trust you,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And if you decompose trust to its elements, again, this is just my view of the world. It starts with expertise. I'm not going to ask you to do something unless I believe you have the expertise to do it, right? And and then the second element of trust is a commitment, right? Once you give a commitment, you're going to do whatever is humanly possible to get it done, right? You're not going to be distracted by whatever else is happening. And
Mm.
the third is transparency,
Yes.
right? So you're
Mm.
going to keep me updated about, not every 5 minutes, but at the end of every day or every week or whatever reason, depending on the length of the project, you're going to keep me updated what's going on, right? Because otherwise, then I get very anxious about it. I ask somebody to do something, and I think it is Ronald Reagan who said, right, trust but verify,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if for me, the verification thing for the person who's being trusted to do is to keep the other person informed about what's going on, right? So they can be updated of what's going on and plan accordingly, right? So yeah, sorry.
So, Jeby, I was just, going back to the statement that you made that we very often don't account for the role of leadership, right, in building
Correct.
trust.
Yeah.
So, would you be able to share a tricky situation that you faced as a leader, and your role as a leader in establishing or re-establishing trust? Is there a situation that you can?
Yeah, I mean, plenty. I mean, just I'll tell you about 3, 4 weeks ago, there's this girl who started in my team. I mean, this girl has been with us for a number of years, about 4.5, 5 years, and I noticed leadership potential in her. Right, so I started putting her on an accelerated path, a
Mm,
career path.
mm,
Right, and just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I don't remember exactly, I asked her a question. Because I had asked her to do something and she hadn't kept me informed. So I asked her what's going on. And she said, she's nearly completed it, or it was actually to go visit a client.
yeah,
And then later on in the evening, I got a call from somebody else who overheard this conversation and said, "Sir, she lied to you." Right? She didn't go. She lied to you. Right? So that broke the trust, because this is somebody who I noticed leadership potential. And to me, if you do not have integrity, then and that person does, no matter what are the qualities that person has, then there is no leadership potential, right? So the question that I ask myself first is, have I created an environment where people are afraid to speak up?
mm,
Right, so that was the question to myself, right? And I introspected on it, and I thought I had created an environment where people generally come to me and tell me good news, bad news, it doesn't matter, right? So I went and asked a few people, "Listen, I'm just validating this. Do you feel safe enough to tell me bad news?" And the answer was yes, right? So I came to a conclusion that this person's career within the company is no longer tenable, right?
right,
So I decided to terminate, right?
right.
So, but I was not very comfortable with that decision. Meaning, yeah, she lied to me, but it was not lying about something that was, that was super critical,
Got it.
right?
Yeah.
Right. So, my dilemma was, integrity is something that you don't budge on. I mean, you don't tolerate. There is zero tolerance there. I mean, there are two things I've told my team: that I will not tolerate lack of integrity. I will not tolerate posh kind of things.
Yes.
Right. Right. These are two things, you're on your own. I'm not going to get in between. Right. So on one side, I had to stay true to my word about I will not tolerate lack of integrity. And on the other side, whatever this person has done wasn't like, it was not going to it was not severe, right?
Yes.
But I had made the decision to terminate, and I had communicated it to HR also, to call the person and say, "Listen, yeah, it's done."
Right.
And then I called, my former boss, Shankar Anasamy at IBM, right? He's a mentor to me. So I
Yeah.
called him and said, "Shankar, this is the dilemma that I'm facing." And he put my head straight. He said, "Listen, you're not thinking about this the right way, right? Everybody does. They sometimes do these things, right?
Mm,
It can be a miss at that moment,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
So I don't think you should terminate. I think you should give a stern warning and let her be." And
Yeah.
which is what I did. I gave a stern warning, but I called her in and I asked her, "Listen, we need to have a conversation. Did you feel unsafe that I that to tell me the line?" She said, "No, sir, I completely misunderstood your question, and that's why I said this." Anyway, we let it go, right? So that
Yeah.
is one instance. I'll give you one more instance that happened yesterday. So I come with a number of years of experience in services,
Yeah.
consulting services, right? So I've seen a lot of situations where the engagement goes south, right? And at that point, you reach out to the contract
Mm,
and you look at the terms of the contract to see what did we agree to do.
mm,
So, in my new company, we're sending out contracts for delivery, and I never looked at any of this stuff before. But a couple of days ago, I decided to take a look at the contracts. And what I found was, there were huge gaps in the way the contract was being written, right? Because there was no fault, the scope was not specified well. What the deliverables were not specified well. None of that was happening. So in the event of the delivery going south, there was no on either party, or for the client or for us, to fall back on. So I started reviewing every contract, right? So yesterday, my sales team called me and said, "Listen, why are you micromanaging?" Right? And that's when. And then second question they asked us is, asked me is, "Don't you trust us?"
Mm.
Right? So again, I had to sit them down and say, "Listen, it's not a matter of trust. It is contractual, right? Because these things can have financial implications that can bring the company down. It's not, but once I feel comfortable that, you guys are capturing all of the terms that needs to be captured, then I will not be, micromanaging. And for that matter, I didn't even think I was micromanaging. From my perspective, it was just doing due diligence to ensure that the contracts were well written. So, Sai, coming back to your question, lack of there is no signature approach that I have, but it always starts with a conversation, right? You've got to get down to the basics of why did the situation happen, right? And you got to look inside of you first and say, what did I do to contribute to that situation? Did I create an environment where where people feel unsafe about talking up, which was the first instance. The second instance was, did I couldn't actually put the blame on myself that I didn't actually train the team to look for these terms and conditions that that they ought to be looking for when they sign the contract, right? So it boils down to a conversation, right? And there are certain instances where no matter what the conversation is, it is never going to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah. So, Jeby, just from you pointed out two things, but I'm seeing many more, and I just want to sort of feed that back into our conversation. Because I'm seeing that the start of the process is with the leader beginning to see what is their part in the whole situation. Yeah. So I think reflection seems to be an important place that you start in. Yeah. Then it comes to the actual clarification and the conversation to both understand what happened and also to put things back into perspective.
Correct.
Right. I see that as being, really important. And thirdly, I'm seeing that, in both these instances, you've really needed to pause and sometimes even consult, to see, am I on the right track? Am I overreacting here? And to what level do I want to give perspective, set context, maybe even share, my upset or my disappointment. Yeah. So it sounds like a very open conversation on psychological safety that you have established, for your team, and any misgivings or any doubts they have, just setting that straight becomes a very important move in order trust building or to be clear about how to move ahead in the situation.
Correct. And Sai, we deal with our kids also the same, when they're young, they're afraid to tell you what their marks are, right? They lie to you. It's all happened. And I used to tell them, listen, once you break, trust is a slippery slope, right? If you break it once, then it takes a long time to get it back, right? And most of us start from a perspective of we just inherently trust people, right? No matter who we may not have met the person before, but there is an inherent trust that you start off with, unless that person does something to ruin it, right? And once trust is broken, it is extremely difficult to get back on, right? And no matter who it is, if it's your boss, your parent, your guru, whoever it is, once you say something that is contradicting with what you stand for, then the other person begins to question everything else that you have said.
Absolutely. Yes. You just come into the, to the category of people where you tend to doubt or wonder about anything that comes out of their mouth.
Correct. Right. So that's why it's for leaders, it's extremely important, to give trust, to get trust, right? And you have to, Caesar's wife should be above suspicion, right? So if there is bad news to be played out, you have to say that, right? And if there is feedback to be given, you have to give it. I've always believe, Sai, there is the content of a conversation, and there is how do you deliver that content,
That's
right?
right. Yes.
Right, and how you deliver is much more important than the content of the conversation, right? And
Yeah.
I'll just tell you one anecdote that made me realize this. When I was with IBM, I got into a argument with a client, right? And the argument went a little south, and the client got very upset, right? And I said what I had to say, and I came. And Vanita, who was the managing director of IBM at that time, she called me She called me the next day and said, "Listen, Jeby, people will forget what you told them, but they will never forget how you make them feel."
Yeah.
Right. So I went and apologized to the client, and that client is now a very good friend of mine.
Yeah.
Right, because I went and apologized, and I realized, what I said was the right thing to say, but the way I said it was absolutely the wrong way to do it.
Yeah, so the whole emotional behavioral element of the communication is what you're saying is so important to pay attention to.
Correct.
Yeah. So Jeby, as we are sort of closing the conversation, I'm just wondering if we had to zoom out and look at your own style, right, of building trust, or even facing a trust conversation. Yeah. If I had to ask you, what are the just 2 or 3 things that you would leave, a listener with? Yeah, most of the listeners, are leaders in their own right, leading teams.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, what would you say are the 2 or 3 really, really top of the mind things that we can keep in our mind while leading teams?
I think the first question is to ask ourselves, how are we responsible for the situation? Right? How are we contributing to it? Right.
Yeah.
And do what is necessary to correct the situation. Change starts from the top.
Yeah.
Right. That's one. Number 2, create an environment where it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
Right. Not stupid failures. Right. When you ride a motorbike, wear a damn helmet. I mean, that's a stupid failure. Right. But keep and create an environment where it's okay to fail. And the way you do that is by owning up your own mistakes in front of the team.
Mm.
Right. And third is, and we don't do this enough, repeat as often as you can, how important trust is and how easy it is to lose it, and how do you actually maintain it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeby. This has been very, very rich. And I think your examples and anecdotes just make it all so real. So thank you so much for this
Thank
conversation.
you. Thanks for the opportunity.